The afternoon sun hung low over Maplewood Street, coloring the pavement with soft gold as Marcus Lane wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag. The familiar scent of engine grease and warm asphalt drifting through the open garage doors. He had just finished tightening the last bolt on an old pickup when he heard the timid scraping of small bicycle wheels against concrete, a hesitant sound that didn't match the usual noise of the neighborhood. Marcus turned, brow lifting, and saw a little boy no more than 8 pushing a beat-up blue bike with a bent front tire and a chain dragging along the ground like it had given up long before the boy had. The child's chest rose and fell quickly, as if he'd been running, his blonde hair sticking to his forehead, his pale cheeks flushed with the kind of frustration that only kids carry openly. Sir," the boy whispered, standing at the edge of the garage, as if unsure whether he had the right to step closer. Marcus set the rag down and crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over him. "What's your name, champ?" he asked gently. The boy swallowed. "Eli." Marcus nodded. "All right, Eli. What happened to the bike?" The boy looked down and fidgeted with his shirt hem. I hit a curb. Too hard. I think I broke it." He paused, voice cracking. "My dad said to stop bothering him with stuff like this." Marcus felt something pinch softly inside his chest. He understood more than he wished he did. He waved him in. "Bring it here. Let's take a look." Eli's eyes widened not with excitement, but with disbelief, like he wasn't expecting kindness from a stranger today. Marcus lifted the bike onto the stand, hands moving with the quiet confidence of a man who had fixed things. Scars. Engines. Lives for longer than most people noticed. Eli watched him with a kind of careful hope, the kind that made Marcus slow his movements so the boy could see exactly what he was doing. As if the repair was more than metal and tools, it was trust forming piece by piece. As Marcus straightened the handlebars, he heard a small sniff. Eli quickly wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. "Sorry," the boy muttered. "I didn't mean to cry." Marcus shook his head gently. "Hey, tears mean you care. That's nothing to apologize for." Eli blinked, surprised by the softness in his tone. The bike was nearly fixed when Marcus noticed something else. Seely's hands trembling lightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, something unspoken. He opened his mouth to ask, but before he could, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the sidewalk, and Eli's face changed instantly, drained, frightened, frozen. The boy whispered one shaky word that made Marcus straighten slowly, rags slipping from his fingers. "Dad." The heavy footsteps grew louder, each one landing like a warning against the pavement, and before Marcus could even rise fully to his feet, a tall man in an expensive gray jacket stormed into view, his face already twisted with irritation, his voice sharp enough to cut through the warm air of the garage. Eli instinctively stepped back, shoulders curling inward, that tiny flare of hope he had moments ago collapsing in on itself, as if it had never existed. The man's eyes narrowed when he saw Marcus, a stranger bending over his son's broken bike, and he barked out a harsh, breathless sentence that carried more accusation than question. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my kid's bike?" Marcus straightened slowly, wiping his palms on his jeans in one nervous sweep, but his voice stayed calm even as the man's tension spilled into the air between them. "Just helping him out," Marcus said, nodding toward the trembling boy. He brought it in. Front tire was bent, chain slipped. Easy fix. The father's jaw clenched, and he let out a scoff that carried years of unresolved anger, the kind that had nothing to do with bikes or chains or curbs. He stepped closer, towering over Marcus in a way that was meant to remind him who had power here, or at least who believed he did. "I didn't ask you to fix anything," the man snapped. "He should have waited for me. I could have taken care of it." But Marcus had seen the truth in Eli's downcast eyes. Whatever this man took care of, it wasn't always gentle, and it certainly wasn't patient. Marcus kept his tone low and steady, choosing care over confrontation. "He didn't want to bother you," Marcus said quietly. "He thought he'd get in trouble." Eli's father stiffened at those last words, the muscles in his face twitching like someone had hit a nerve. His gaze flicked to Eli, sharp, cutting, and the boy dropped his eyes instantly to the floor, as if he'd been trained to shrink. Marcus felt that same pinch in his chest return, deeper this time, heavier, like a memory he didn't want but couldn't forget. He'd seen boys hide fear behind silence before. He had once been one. The man jabbed a finger toward Eli. "Get over here now." Eli flinched so hard, Marcus actually stepped forward without thinking, a protective instinct rising in him the way fire rises to oxygen. "Hey, easy," Marcus said softly. He didn't do anything wrong. Kids hit curbs. Bikes break. That's life, not a crime. For a moment, the father stared at Marcus like he couldn't decide if he should shout, threaten, or simply walk away. His breath came fast, his nostrils flared, and something darker flickered behind his eyes. Shame, maybe, or fear of being seen for who he really was. Instead of answering, he snatched the bike from Marcus's hands so abruptly that Eli winced as if the metal had struck him. Marcus took a slow step toward the boy and lowered his voice even further, keeping it steady, warm, human. "You okay, Eli?" he asked. The boy didn't speak. He just nodded with small, jerky movements, his fingers gripping the hem of his shirt like he was trying to hold himself together before he fell apart. Then something happened, small, quiet, but powerful enough to stop Marcus cold. As the father dragged the bike toward the street, Eli's eyes met Marcus's one last time, and in that split-second glance, Marcus saw a silent plea. Not for a bike, for safety, for help, for anyone to notice. Someone had, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Something that promised the story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. Marcus watched the father yank the bike toward the sidewalk, the small wheels bumping unevenly over the concrete, as Eli trailed behind him like a shadow trying not to be noticed. The afternoon sun painted their figures long against the street, stretching the space between father and son even farther than their footsteps did. And Marcus felt that same tightening in his chest again, a squeeze of old memories, worn and heavy, pressing up from a place he didn't visit often. He wiped his hands absently on the rag tucked into his belt, but his gaze stayed fixed on Eli, who walked with his head down, shoulders hunched so deeply it looked as if he were trying to fold into himself completely. Eli didn't look back until his father reached the curb. It was only a flicker, a tiny turn of the head, the kind of motion so small another person might have missed it. But Marcus didn't. Eli's eyes wide, pleading, scared, met Marcus's for a second that felt like a heartbeat stretched across an entire childhood. And though the boy didn't speak, Marcus heard the message clearly. A message he knew because he had once sent the same silent message to strangers who had never noticed. "Please don't forget I exist. Please don't pretend you didn't see what you saw." The bike wobbled under the father's grip as he shoved it into the back of a silver SUV, slamming the trunk with more force than the moment required. He opened the driver's door and barked an order at Eli, whose small hands fumbled with the door handle before climbing into the back seat. The door shut with a hollow thud, and in seconds the engine roared to life, and the SUV merged into traffic, disappearing down the sunlit street as if the boy's entire presence had been swallowed up by the world. Again, Marcus stood still, long after the car vanished, the echo of that tiny, haunting glance clinging to him like dust. He had promised himself years ago he wouldn't get involved in other people's storms, that he'd keep his life simple, fix engines, mind his own business, keep his heart tucked away where memories couldn't reach it. But something about Eli felt too familiar, too raw, too close to the boy. Marcus used to be a boy who had once waited for kindness that arrived too late. The garage around him hummed with quiet, the ticking of cooling engines, the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracked windows, the soft rattle of tools settling in their drawers. Marcus's hands were steady, but inside him, something unsettled had begun to wake, a mixture of anger, protectiveness, and an ache he thought he'd buried with his childhood. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mrs. Delgado, the elderly neighbor who often walked by the garage. "Did you see what happened with that boy? I think something's wrong." Marcus stared at the message, the words confirming what his heart already knew. Whatever storm Eli lived in, he wasn't imagining it, and Marcus Lane, despite every promise he'd made to avoid trouble, felt the first pull of responsibility taking hold of him, a pull he couldn't ignore. Marcus closed the garage early that night, the metal door rolling down with a groaning rumble that echoed in the quiet neighborhood. But the sound didn't settle him. Nothing did. His mind kept replaying that look heedless wide, frightened eyes frozen in a mixture of apology and desperation, like he was scared to speak but even more scared to stay silent. Marcus walked home with slow steps, the kind a man takes when his feet know where he's going but his heart isn't ready for what he might find at the end of the road. The street lamps flickered to life as dusk settled over the sidewalks, casting long shadows that stretched out like cracked paths, leading through the neighborhoods where people kept their blinds closed, their problems tucked away, their truths whispered behind doors that didn't always stay shut. When Marcus reached his apartment, he barely stepped inside before he heard rapid knocks, 3 sharp taps, followed by 2 softer ones, like someone unsure whether they had the right to keep knocking at all. He opened the door slowly. There stood Eli, hair messy, chest heaving, hands trembling at his sides. Not a scrape on him, but everything about his shaking frame screamed hurt, in a language that didn't leave bruises. "Marcus," the boy whispered, voice cracking like thin glass. I didn't know where else to go." Marcus knelt down instinctively, lowering himself until they were at eye level. The hallway's dim light fell softly over Eli's pale face, highlighting the wet shine beneath his lashes. Hey, Marcus murmured, steady but gentle. "You're safe here. Just breathe for me, okay?" Eli tried, but the breath came out choppy, uneven, as if he had been keeping his emotions bottled so tightly that the cork finally snapped. "My dad. He's mad," the boy stammered. "He said I embarrassed him at the shop. He yelled the whole way home." Eli swallowed hard, and then, "My bike. He threw it out. He said I don't deserve to ride anything until I learn how not to be useless." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, a slow burn rising beneath his skin. Not the loud kind of anger, but the heavy kind, the kind that comes from recognizing someone else's pain too clearly. He placed a steady hand on Eli's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said softly. "What your dad said, that's not on you. That's not who you are." Eli blinked up at him. "Then why does it feel like it is?" "Because words from the people who should love you the most cut deeper than any blade. Because Marcus once had a father who knew how to break a spirit without leaving a single mark. Because some wounds don't show on skin, they show in the way a child stands, afraid to take up space." But Marcus didn't say any of that. Instead, he squeezed Eli's shoulder slightly, grounding him. "Maybe because no one's ever told you different," he said quietly. "I'm telling you now." Before Eli could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, heavy, full of anger and alcohol, and a deep voice growled from the stairwell, "Eli, get over here." Marcus rose to his feet, heart steady but burning. For the first time, he finally saw the man behind the storm. The hallway fell into a suffocating stillness as the man's silhouette emerged from the dim stairwell lighting. Heavy boots scraped against the concrete with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step sounding less like footsteps and more like warnings carved into the air. Eli stiffened beside Marcus, his small fingers instinctively clutching the fabric of Marcus's sleeve as though it were the last safe place he knew existed. Marcus felt the tremble in the boy's grip, a tremble that told a story no child should ever have to narrate. Eli's father reached the landing, the scent of stale cigarettes and whiskey drifting ahead of him like an unwelcome shadow. He wasn't an enormous man, but he carried his anger like armor tight over his shoulders, tense in his jaw, coiled in his fists. His eyes, a cold, steely blue, darted from Eli to Marcus, confusion flickering for only a heartbeat before raw resentment took its place. "So this is where you ran," the man spat, voice low but curdled with menace, to the mechanic. He took another slow step. "Didn't I teach you better than to bother strangers with nonsense?" Marcus lifted a hand, slightly not threatening, but firm enough to draw a boundary. "He's not bothering me," he said, voice calm in a way that came from years of learning how to stand steady in storms. "He didn't start. He's upset. Anyone can see that." The father scoffed, a bitter laugh scraping from his throat. "You don't know a damn thing about what you're seeing." His eyes flicked sharply down to Eli. "Get home now." Eli didn't move. His hand remained clenched on Marcus's sleeve, and Marcus felt the boy's breath quicken, shallow, afraid. The man took another step, jaw tightening. "I said, get home." Marcus exhaled slowly, stepping slightly in front of Eli, blocking, not challenging, but anchoring. "Sir," he began, measured and respectful. "Maybe tonight isn't the night to force anything. The kid's shaken up. Let him breathe. We can talk The man snapped, taking a sudden step closer. "There is no we. This is my kid. My house. My rules." His voice grew rougher, louder. "You don't step between a father and his son." Marcus held the man's gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm stepping between fear and a child," he said quietly. "That's all." That struck something. The father's eyes widened in understanding, but in rage at being called out, without the shield of neighbors pretending not to notice. "He's my boy," the father growled, leaning in so close the smell of alcohol poured out between his words. "You don't get to decide what he needs." Marcus didn't back up. "Maybe not," he admitted softly, "but I know what he doesn't." A dangerous silence fell. Eli's father's knuckles whitened, tightening as if every muscle in his hand begged to strike anything, to make the moment bend back under his control. Eli flinched behind Marcus, breath hitching sharply, and then a door at the end of the hallway opened. A neighbor peeked out. Another light clicked on across the hall. Voices whispered. Eyes watched, and the father realized he wasn't alone with his anger anymore. Marcus kept his voice steady. "Let's talk downstairs." Away from him. The man hesitated because predators liked darkness, not witnesses, and slowly, with a simmering glare. He nodded, but as Marcus followed him toward the stairs, he felt something cold settle deep in his gut. This wasn't over. Not even close. The stairwell felt colder than the hallway, as though the walls themselves were exhaling the heaviness of every argument, every slammed door, every quiet tear this building had absorbed over the years. The flickering bulb overhead cast shadows that stretched and shuddered along the concrete, making the narrow space feel more like a place where secrets went to echo than a simple set of steps. Eli remained upstairs with the neighbor watching him, small hands clutched around a cup of water, his eyes glued to the stairwell where Marcus and his father had disappeared. Marcus had turned back once, giving the boy a faint nod, the type of nod that said, "I'll be okay," the kind adults give when they want to reassure a child, even if their own nerves twist beneath the surface. At the bottom of the stairs, Eli's father stopped abruptly, not pacing, not yelling, just standing there, shoulders rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence stretched between them, taut and heavy, until Marcus finally filled it with a steady voice. "You don't have to scare him to raise him," Marcus said quietly. The words drifted in the cold stairwell like fragile things, soft but sharp enough to land where they needed to. Eli's father's jaw flexed, eyes flashing. "You think I want to scare him?" he snapped. "You think I enjoy this?" He gestured vaguely upward, toward the hallway, the neighbors, the witnesses. "You don't know what it's like. None of you do." Marcus leaned against the railing, not slouching, but bracing as though he understood the weight behind the man's words, even before the man himself did. "Then tell me," Marcus said gently. "Tell me what's going on." For a moment, the father looked ready to erupt again, but something in Marcus's tone cracked through the anger and invitation instead of a fight. His shoulders sagged inches, the tightness around his eyes loosening just enough for something other than rage to show through. "My wife left 3 months ago," he rasped out, voice raw as gravel. "Packed her bags while I was at work, said she couldn't do this life anymore, left a note, didn't even take him with her." Marcus's breath caught. Eli's father rubbed the back of his neck with a shaking hand. "I've been working double shifts. I barely sleep, I barely eat, and every time I look at him, I see how much he misses her, and I don't know how to fill that hole. I don't know how to be both parents. I don't know how to fix grief that's bigger than both of us." His voice cracked on the last word, surprising them both. Marcus stepped closer, not as a threat, but as a man who knew too well what it felt like to carry emotions until they turned into storms inside your chest. "You're human," Marcus said softly, "but he's a child. He doesn't know your pain. He only feels your anger." The father swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "And that anger," Marcus continued, "is teaching him to hide, not to trust, not to come to you. That's why he ran tonight." Those words hit deeper than any punch could have. The man pressed his palm to his forehead, breath shaking. "I don't want to lose him too," he whispered. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You haven't," he said. "Not yet." For the first time since the confrontation began, Eli's father covered his face with both hands and just, for a few seconds, let the facade fall. Shoulders trembling, chest heaving. A grown man quietly breaking apart in a stairwell no one cared about yesterday. Marcus didn't touch him. He didn't rush him. He simply gave the man space to unravel, without judgment. Because sometimes the most powerful help isn't fixing someone. It's letting them finally feel what they've been running from, above them. A small shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. Eli, watching, listening, face softening, and Marcus knew. This was the moment everything would change. Eli stood frozen at the top of the stairs, his small frame trembling slightly as the dim stairwell light caught the edges of his hair and the thin fabric of his shirt, making him look impossibly fragile against the heavy concrete backdrop. The boy's eyes, wide and wet, flicked between Marcus and his father with a confusion so raw, it felt like the air itself grew heavy with it. He had come quietly, one step at a time, each creak of the old wooden flooring announcing a child who no longer wanted to hide but didn't yet know how to step into a moment filled with adult pain. Marcus turned first, seeing the boy, and something warm but cautious flickered through him. He didn't smile. This wasn't a moment for pretending. He simply stepped aside, giving father and son a clear path to one another. Eli's father looked up as though he had been shaken awake from a nightmare, his breath hitching when he saw his son watching him with a fear a child should never have to carry. For a moment, the man didn't move. His hands hung at his sides, fingers twitching nervously, as though unsure whether he had earned the right to reach for the boy he had just terrified. Eli shifted hesitantly, gripping the stair railing like it was the only steady thing in his whole world. When he found the courage to step down one stair, his voice small and trembling finally broke through the suffocating silence. "Dad, are you mad at me?" The question shattered the last piece of the father's defenses. He inhaled sharply, chest rising with a deep, unstable breath, and started up the stairs, slowly, each step heavy with regret. "No, Eli," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I'm mad at myself. I'm mad because I've been trying so hard to be strong that I forgot you needed me to be gentle too." The boy's lip trembled, and his father knelt down in front of him, lowering himself until they were eye level. He cupped Eli's small cheeks with hands that shook from exhaustion, not anger. brushing away a tear with his thumb as his own eyes glistened with unspoken apologies. I shouldn't have yelled. I shouldn't have scared you. I'm so sorry, he murmured, letting the grief he had hidden for months pour out in a voice stripped of pride. Eli let out a tiny whimper, the kind only a child burdened with too much fear can make, and he leaned forward, burying himself in his father's arms. The man wrapped him tightly, holding him in a desperate, trembling embrace that spoke more loudly than any words could have. It was the kind of hug that tried to pull back all the nights spent crying alone, all the slammed doors, all the unspoken fears. Eli clung to him with the ferocity of a child who had been afraid of losing the only parent he had left, his small hands gripping the fabric of his father's jacket as though anchoring himself to a promise. Marcus watched them quietly, standing still in the stairwell, as though he understood that this moment belonged only to them. The tension that had filled the air just minutes ago melted into a fragile tenderness that hovered between father and son. Fragile and trembling, yet undeniably real. When the father finally opened his eyes, he looked directly at Marcus, his expression no longer filled with suspicion or rage, but something closer to gratitude, uncertain, but deeply sincere. With Eli still in his arms, the man whispered, even softer than before, almost afraid to break the spell of healing that had just begun. I don't want to be this kind of father anymore, he said. I want to be someone he feels safe running to. Not from. Marcus nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting into the smallest, gentlest acknowledgement. Because forgiveness wasn't an event. It was a first step. And tonight, both father and son had finally taken it. The three of them stood in the stairwell for a long, quiet moment. The cold concrete and flickering lights suddenly, feeling less like the setting of a crisis, and more like the fragile birthplace of something new. Eli's head rested against his father's chest, tiny breaths warming the fabric of his jacket, while the man held him with a steadiness that hadn't been there before, an anchor forged not from strength, but from vulnerability finally allowed to breathe. Marcus remained a few steps below, hands clasped loosely in front of him, respectful and present, without crowding them, as though he understood instinctively that healing often needed space rather than applause. Eventually, Eli's father exhaled deeply and stood, lifting the boy with him. His posture was different now, not tense and defensive, but open in a way that made him look strangely younger, as if shedding anger had peeled back years of exhaustion. He shifted Eli to one arm and extended the other toward Marcus in a gesture that carried the weight of humility wrapped in gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly, voice rough but honest, for stepping in, for not giving up on us when I gave up on myself. Marcus grasped his hand, the handshake firm and grounded, the kind that said, I see you, and I know you're trying. As their hands parted, Eli lifted his head, wiping his cheeks with the back of his sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper, when he looked at Marcus and said, Are you gonna still live downstairs, so I can visit? The question, innocent and hopeful, softened the moment even further, prompting a small, warm laugh from both men. Marcus nodded. Yeah, kid, he said, I'll be right here. You knock whenever you need me. They made their way back up the stairs, slow and unhurried, the tension that had gripped the building now replaced with something gentler. As they reached the hallway, neighbors who had been peeking behind doors and cracked frames began to retreat, drawn back into their homes by the quiet assurance that the worst had passed. Eli's father carried the boy toward their apartment with a tenderness that hadn't been visible earlier, pausing at the doorway to glance back at Marcus with a look that spoke volumes and unspoken promise to do better, to be better, to never let fear become anger again. When the door finally closed, Marcus remained in the hallway for a moment, letting the silence settle around him like a soft blanket. The night had been long and heavy, but something inside him felt lighter, steadier. He walked slowly back to his apartment, the hum of distant traffic drifting through the old windows, and sat on the edge of his bed. As he unrolled his sleeves and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, He allowed himself a deep breath that seemed to cleanse something far older than tonight. Because sometimes, a man wasn't meant to save the world. Sometimes he was meant to save one moment, one child. One frightened parent hand. That was enough to shift an entire lifetime. And as Marcus lay back, staring at the cracked ceiling with a faint smile tugging at his lips, he realized that bravery didn't always roar in battlefields or shine in headlines. Sometimes it whispered in stairwells, in shaky apologies, in a child's quiet question, in a man deciding to break a cycle instead of repeating it. Some nights changed nothing. Tonight changed everything. Moral kindness doesn't require strength. It requires courage. And the courage to stand between hurt and the innocent can rewrite the future of a family one choice. One moment, one person at a time.